Well, so far today, we've looked at a wide variety of things that are involved in dealing with a serious in-flight emergency. So we've done all the right things. There's a runway ahead. What about the last couple of minutes? Not only getting the airplane safely on the ground, but making sure everything on board gets off. As pilots, we're familiar with all the resources on an airplane, and we know how best to use them to ensure a safe flight. But what resources do we have waiting for us, and what will we need to do to make sure we can best use those resources? Here to address that, this very issue, is a panel of experts to enlighten us on what's waiting at the airport. Our moderator is Steve Jangelis, who is chairman of ALPA's Airport and Ground Environment Group. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Chuck. Welcome, everyone, to the last panel of the day. And as you've seen, there has been a theme of an aircraft that has experienced an in-flight fire and the anticipated actions of the flight crew to get that aircraft safely to the ground. My piece of the puzzle is to discuss what we do, how we do it, and who we speak with when we get onto the ground to try to fight the fire, evacuate the passengers, and safely recover the cargo and the aircraft. With me today is a great panel of experts I've had the great pleasure of working throughout the years with. First, Chief Timothy Sampey. He's with the Chicago Fire Department, District Chief for both Chicago airports at O'Hare and Midway. Also, Marc Tonnacliff, Firefighting and ARP Specialist with the FAA. David Siewert, he's the Air Traffic Manager at New York's JFK Airport and a founding member and chairman of the Airport Construction Advisory Council, as well as Jess Grigg, the Independent Pilots Association ARP Specialist and fire safety subject matter expert. All of these gentlemen here are well-versed on dealing with an aircraft that has either experienced an emergency, be it medical or a fire emergency, and are well-versed. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we've experienced, tell a few stories, talk about what is the target audience when we make that radio call to ask for help as pilots when we arrive at the airport. I first want to start out with Dave Siewert. Being at a large towered airport such as JFK, there's a number of operations there, and when you experience an emergency call from an aircraft, how does that message get passed to you, and what do you do when you realize that there's an aircraft approaching your airfield that has a fire emergency?
First, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm absolutely honored to be here, particularly with this audience, so thank you. I would probably say the most important aspect of that initial communication is the specificity with which the pilots and flight crews communicate to us what's going on. There are specific terms, of course: mayday, 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 pan, 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 or emergency, and what exactly the nature of the emergency is. That helps us to prepare how to support you better. And we will try our best to obtain sufficient info from you on what the nature of the emergency is so we can help to support you. But there's times where you're not going to be able to provide us with that information. It's okay to just say, I need to fly the airplane now, I'll get back to you, if we're asking questions. But the first method is that call into us that there's an emergency, that there's something wrong.
Great. When we talk about in training or when we're speaking as pilots in the simulator, when we say the words roll the trucks, what does that mean to you?
That means notify CFR, Crash Fire Rescue. And if you're telling us to roll the trucks, that means that there's really a significant emergency. We also have the ability and the authority to declare an emergency, and a lot of times we'll go ahead and roll the trucks anyway, just in the interest of your safety. But if we hear those words coming from a flight crew, that's one of those things that signals it's significant.
And that's great. And, you know, I intentionally used wrong phraseology there.
Right.
On purpose, because we've had some incidents where an aircraft has had an emergency and requested to roll the trucks, and the air traffic control tower called out the airport authority and not the firefighters or the EMT rescue services. So it's very imperative for us as pilots to use proper terminology when you arrive at the airport. Say, I need ARF equipment, I need rescue services, we have a fire, to be very descriptive. And I think that helps you realize which phone to pick up and who to call. Obviously, there wasn't a dire emergency for that aircraft when it arrived to ask for roll the trucks, and then 2 airport authority people showed up. But obviously, that's a lesson learned that we can all take with us. And we talk about it when we're in the simulators, and we say, okay, I'm going to get to the end of the runway, we're going to evacuate and roll the trucks. And, you know, we train like we fight, fight like we train. We should say the words, I need emergency vehicles, please send an ARF response. Some food for thought for later in training scenarios.
One of the parts, if I could jump in on that, if we hear roll the trucks, what you're going to hear then is one of those annoying ATC questions like, are you declaring an emergency, and if so, what's the nature of the emergency? So the proper phraseology, the specific terms on the front end would eliminate us coming back with a question.
That's great. And like you said, the more data you can receive in the air that we can send to you, and of course we get very busy in the air, and it's helpful to you to realize which phone to pick up and who to call and what the response is. So, but as you know, we get sometimes very busy, and I think some of the best verbiage we could use is stand by.
Right.
You know, aviate the fly the airplane and get it on the ground safely, and then we can communicate that info. But if we do have the time to get that information out, of course, it's very helpful. So Dave, as you make that phone call and you realize that here's an aircraft that is on fire and needs assistance, I have here Chief Sampey here to my left, who would probably be on the other end of that phone call. What do you transmit to him?
We'll transmit all the information we've received from the flight crew, the nature of the emergency, the souls on board, fuel remaining, things that would be of particular interest to Chief Sampey and their staging on how to best support the crew. So any information we get, we'll pass along, and that'll be on a continuing basis. Once we've initially transmitted over the phone and pulled the alarm, the communications will continue on the ground control frequency, and we can then relay directly from the flight crew to the ARF equipment.
Super. So Chief Sampey, you take the phone call and you find out that it is an aircraft, say let's just call it an MD-11 or a 747. How do you decide what is the response? Is it based on the size of the airplane? Is it based on the fuel load? Is it based on whether it's cargo or a passenger aircraft? How do you respond to the phone call?
We respond as a unit, and I'll take this opportunity, like all my others before me, to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And a distinguished panel, and it's not too often you see New York and Chicago sitting next to each other, and it's not a Super Bowl. So it's a beautiful thing. There's just a few things I've just been impressed with all day. I think I'm the only fireman here, and I've heard nothing but fire since about 9 o'clock this morning, and it's intriguing. Something else I'd like to bring, and I'll carry on with this, just a little bit to give you an idea of the pressures that's involved, from the cockpit to the air traffic control tower to the firehouses. Let me make my point. Can you gentlemen stand up? Everybody on the whole panel, just for a second, stand up. This opportunity, it's the last panel of the day. And I've been on interview boards before, so it's after lunch, last panel of the day, and half the people didn't come back after pulling a fire alarm, and the other half are nodding off. But this is pressure, folks. This is people I've never seen before. Obviously, I'm not very shy. I'm a little nervous, though, because you got an astronaut here, you got generals here, I've got pilots here, I've got two heads of two major unions here. I've got some real important people here, and I feel very comfortable until Kimberly in the other room and that gentleman pointed out the fact this is being webcasted, and I'm going to be criticized by my 10-year-old daughter and 14-year-old daughter when this is all over. That's pressure. Okay? Let me go one step further. You're probably looking at this panel going, who's the fireman and who's the pilot? So if you don't think this is pressure, that this is the guy I got to pull out of wait till you hear the story. The story's beautiful. Wait till you hear the story on this guy, but that's who I got to pull out, or him as his co-pilot. So my job is up here is very easy. So you guys can sit back down. Just to give you an idea what we're dealing with. So now the ring down from the tower comes. It's an all call. And again, Steve, you made a good point on roll the rigs or roll the trucks. They're going to ask you the nature of the emergency. It's not based on the size of the aircraft, what the aircraft hits, if it hits. It's all significant. And you're dealing with the equipment. Every airport has a little bit different procedure. We all have the same objective. We have a little bit different procedures. We have a little bit level of manpower. We have a little bit different level of equipment. So with that, everything basically rolls so to speak. Ours is a ring down. Most firehouses across the country use alert statuses. In Chicago, we use a standby, an emergency, or a crash fire alert. We use 3 different alerts, 1, 2, and 3. Pretty much the same principles, but we're rolling the equipment out, and depending on the severity, on what information that the air traffic controller gives us, and sometimes it's limited on ring down. He might just tell us what runway it is, and where, again, is it alert 1, alert 2? Are they in the air or are they on the ground? That might be all the information we get. We understand that, and we want to know what frequency they're on, because we want to listen. We can't, as a fire service, we cannot help you while you're in the air. They can. That's this guy's job, and they do a great job. And the pilots, I've seen some of the stuff that doesn't make the news, some of the finest flying of airplanes on no nose gear, no main landing gear on one side. It's just amazing on what these pilots can do with these aircraft. And you can tell they have a military background, but we understand the fact that they can't always give us the information because they're going through their checklist. But what are we looking for as a fire department? The souls on board are good, the fuel on board is good. Basically, the fact that you declared an emergency, that's huge. That's telling us you're looking for us on the ground. We're not going to bother you while you're in the air because we can't help you till you get to the ground. But more importantly is, what have you done while you're up there? So in other words, firing your bottles, that's important to us. Are you on air? That's important to us. We know that this isn't a routine false alarm, and there's never such thing as routine. It's the complacency we have in high rises, the same thing you have in cargo holds. You know, the light goes on, is it a bad bulb, or do I have something go on there? It's the unknown. You're better off actually on the cabin level because there's people there. But when it's below you, that's the unknown, that is this real, is this false? So that light comes on. Different airlines do it different ways. Some fire one bottle, some fire both of them. Engines, that is, and there's cargo holds, they fire their bottle, and the light goes off and all is well, and then it comes back on, and now you're at your critical nature. But what we're looking for to them, as soon as they pick up the phone, everybody's going to that apparatus, and they're going either to the incident or the predetermined locations. So.
And Chief, along with that, I think it's important to realize that the closeness in the relationship between the crash rescue folks and the air traffic control folks goes beyond that initial call-up. Part of what we try to do is be aware of what the firefighters' needs are, how they want to stage for a particular emergency, and make sure that they can get there unhindered. Make sure that all traffic is moved out of their way, that they have access to the taxiways and runways that they need to deal with the emergency. So that communication continues beyond the initial call-in and the relaying of the information from the flight crew. So we have a very special closeness with the crash rescue folks, at least at Kennedy we do. We always invite the fire chief to our employee appreciation barbecue because we know food is important, but also we have somebody to point the finger at if we burn the tower down. So that closeness and the communication goes beyond the initial call-in, and it's very important that we're communicating back and forth effectively.
Let me ask a question from a crash standpoint, or if an airplane ends up other than on a taxiway at an airfield inside the airfield fence. When the clearance to go out to an incident or an accident happens, does the fire department have immediate access to all taxiways and runways, or is there a coordination process between yourselves and the towers? I know there's local agreements, but hopefully both of you could speak on that.
Basically, we are restricted on an alert 1, alert 2. Basically, if they're telling us that it's an in-flight emergency, we're not unrestricted access. We're going to be in predetermined locations. In Chicago, at least, on both sides of the airport, both ends of the airport. An emergency alert, again, we have to require permission to cross certain taxiways and runways. On an alert 3 or a crash alert, we have unrestricted access. They basically ground stoppage. They're going to start sending people around, and they're going to give us direct access to the most immediate direct access to the aircraft involved.
Basically, the same model applies at Kennedy as well. I actually started my career in crash fire rescue. I have the highest respect for the folks that do that job. It's a very challenging job. And so what we train on is trying to anticipate, if you haven't communicated a specific need, trying to anticipate that if something goes wrong, we need to have airplanes on taxiway Alpha out of the way. So we during the arrival period of the emergency, a lot of times we'll go ahead and start staging aircraft completely out of the way so you can have unfettered access if you need it.
That's great. I look towards the very end there, the gentleman off to the left, and as Chief Sampey pointed out earlier with our standing up exercise, I intentionally left off in the introduction and the bios what Jess Grigg has seen and done in his career as a pilot for UPS Airlines. Representing the IPA here today, he does a lot of work around the industry, working with the fire districts as well as the ARF working group on getting education and making sure that we are having this dialogue like we're having right here. It's better to meet the firefighters when they're wearing a suit and tie rather than when they're wearing the big Moon Man suit. We shouldn't be having a conversation then. It should be muscle memory. We should be able to act and interact, and getting out in front and speaking with each other and working together is something we'll speak about a little bit later. But back to Jess. Jess was the first officer on the UPS DC-8 accident that occurred at Philadelphia with the fire on board. And Jess has an interesting story to tell about exactly what he saw and what he experienced that day. So by all means, Jess, please tell us about that day.
Well, thanks, Steve. I wanted to first say thank you to all of you like-minded safety professionals out here. There's a ton of passion in this room for safety, saving lives, saving assets. I got to gouge so that I don't get off chasing rabbits too far. But basically, our event, if you've read the NTSB report, this was February 2006 at DC-8. We were scheduled to fly a normal flight from, it was a 4-night sequence. This was the second of 4 nights. And I'd never flown with this crew before. The captain happened to be the most experienced DC-8 pilot we had in the company. And I was at the end, not because of, but you know, I was had enough seniority, I was about to go to captain. And so I'd been 10 years on the aircraft, and the engineer was 62 and a half. Now, keep in mind, 60 was retirement age at this point. And he had reached 60 and decided, I want to hang out the panel back there, and he had a full military retirement. So he was a 757 captain. He wasn't even supposed to be here, Steve. He was supposed to be, he was on reserve, and because the guy was on vacation, the guy was supposed to be flying back there. What a week for vacation, you know, if you're going to have one. So he got paired with us. So I would say one of the important things that happened in the beginning of that night was the load supervisor forgot to give us the hazmat, we call them air dangerous goods at UPS, hazmat envelope, the NOTOC. And we'd already buttoned up the aircraft for below the line, the last part of the start checklist. And so she came on board and taps the engineer on the shoulder. She goes, I forgot to give you this. And he said, well, how'd you get in here? She said, well, I came in through the door, but there's some kind of tent package thing I had to step over, which meant she deployed the slide out of its little clamshell home. Now, keep in mind, this airplane was born as a Delta, and I've got the time noted. I'm trying to be a mic hog here. This airplane was born as a Delta jet in 1967, 2 years after I was born. Now, the escape ropes were also born in 1967. Guess how old the ropes were that were on this airplane in 2006. So as you can imagine, I'm not excited for anything to be tampered with the emergency exit slide, okay? I'm not really wanting to go out the window, and FAA asked me after the accident, they said, could you get out the window if you had to? And I said, well, you know, with the motivation I had by the end of this event, I'd be out that window like a rat through a Cheeto. But when she came in, she deployed that slide out of its little clamshell home on the door. And a mechanic came up, he's trying to put it back in this little house, and when he did, he stuffed too much of the girt bar material back up into the clamshell, which means it still wasn't able to be armed to reach the floor and clipped into the floor, the old school arm in the door. And because of that, it's still going to have to be either deferred or is it going to have to be fixed. he was fiddling with it, and fortunately, there was an old mechanic that came up, and he was an old Eastern guy. And I'm glad he was on duty because I gave him a big bear hug after this event, after we came back to service a couple weeks later. And he was able to get that slide packed in there. And you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you know, I could tell you in the interest of getting this machine out and, you know, 12,000 customers' packages out on time, the company is going to do what's necessary to stay as close on time as they can. And legally, they could do that on MEL if they had to. So we got our slide fixed in the remote necessary means that we would need to use it, you know. So I'll fast forward to cruise altitude. We're at 33,000 feet, and we're just about a minute into the descent. And I'm the flying pilot. The pilot monitoring, of course, is the captain. And I smelled this, like most of us all have experienced some kind of electrical smoke, or, you know how smoke has a very powerful immediate recall? You can drive by your elementary school on Thursday and go, Thursday, fish sticks. You know exactly, but I mean, it's an instantaneous, recall. But this smoke had an odor signature, not like fish sticks, but it smelled like wood burning, paper burning. And I said, well, first that went through my mind was, are we flying through over some timber that's being clear cut, some burned, prepared for, when we're in Southeast going from Atlanta to Philadelphia, that's likely in the winter, and that's normal time that would happen. So is that being ingested through the packs from the atmosphere, or is that something coming from inside the airplane? Keep in mind, we have no smoke just like this room, no smoke and no enunciator saying you got something definitely going on board this airplane. So I thought about these NTSB reports in the past where crews, they allowed an event to snowball into a major motion picture where had they said something earlier, they may have redirected what the outcome was. So I said something to the crew. I said, hey, you guys smell that woody burning smell? And the captain said, well, no, I don't smell anything. And the engineer says, I think I've been smelling that. Then, past tense, I don't know how long. So the captain turns around and says, well, Joe, the engineer, he says, go back there in the back of the little courier area. We still have a bulkhead. We had 2 courier seats and our potty and our hot cup back there. And we got a 9G net, looks like a spider web, of course. And they've got a smoke curtain. It's kind of like a boat cover. And he pulled back the smoke curtain, and he shined his light. He couldn't see any smoke, but he says it smells stronger back there as he sat down. I hadn't shaved my neck in a couple of days, the back of my neck, and these little hairs on the back of my neck kind of stood up and go, man, what if something's going on back there and these smoke detectors aren't picking them up? And I'm thinking about smoke detector certification. At this time, I had not done any homework on how are these things certified. Is it with an empty airplane or a full airplane, pressurized with airflow? Well, guess how they're certified? Empty. They got a cookie sheet out there, and there's no airflow pressurized situation moving. So if you've got a smoldering fire back there that's trying to get out of containers, and you got a full airplane of boxes and containers, how big of a fire does it have to be before the smoke detector picks it up? So what I found, and I thought myself as a pilot, all those years of flying, was when I came up, when we saw a smoke detector illuminate, well, in our brain we're going, hey, the fire just started. No, brother, it's been going on for who knows how long. And in our event, it was 20 minutes from when I smelled the smoke to when we had a confirmation that it was really on board our airplane. And when the smoke detector came on, we were already basically on base, heading toward the outer mark. It was a beautiful night. It was right at freezing, which was important for ARF when you start spreading water around on cold airplanes. And it was a light wind, and by the grace of God, I'm telling you, it was clear night. Because and that made a difference of me being here, because if it was 400 overcasts, and we had to come out and do the full ILS. That amount of time, and I think you can go back, forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Marc Cagnina. He's a Aero Safety World guy. He wrote a good article. It's called Fire in the Hold, and it was very well written. And regarding Deborah Hirschman, she made a comment in there early on in the article. She said, this crew didn't have minutes to live, they had seconds to live. So, and I agree with that because of the dynamics of what happened. So when the smoke detector came on, engineer says, cargo smoke, and I swear it was probably maybe a second between, and I was reaching down for my mask, and to me, I describe it to firefighters when I'm training aircraft rescue firefighters on our cargo jets as the airplane exhaled white, like a kitchen match, blown out smoke. And he said, cargo smoke, and the smoke comes from behind the engineer's panel and through the aisle. Of course, the first thing in my mind is, oh, this is the real deal. Put our mask on, and I'm on autopilot. We were about 4,000 feet. We were starting to slow to configure, and we were talking to approach control. I just told the crew, I'm turning the airplane toward the runway, and I just shot for an extended center line, maybe a half mile outside of final, to cut that corner. And the captain was running the radios. I thought it was wise of him, even though we really didn't know each other, had only flown together one night, to leave me flying, because on a 3-man airplane, he is the only one with a fisheye view of everything that's going on. Had he taken the airplane and left me to talk to ATC, help manage him, do my pilot monitoring duties, there's no way I can assist a guy right behind me, that's running the checklist. So I thought that was wise of the captain. And some friends of mine, I'll share this with you guys as I share with firefighters, because you deserve it, is all the time and personal sacrifice you put into safety. I had friends ask me, what went through your mind? Did you think about your little girl, your family? No, man, it was like somebody's trying to kill you in traffic. You don't have time to think about, this Rolodex of your life and puppy dogs and fields of golden wheat. And it was first grasping reality, this is really happening to us, and then doing what I'm supposed to do as we're trained. So the one thing I did think about was ValueJet. That happened the first year I was at UPS. And I wondered, was this the beginning of what it was like for them? So, and the second thing I told myself was, don't screw this up, because you're not going to get a chance to come around again. And it's the hardest thing to do is to try to race for the runway, but be slowing the airplane down to configure so you can hurry up and get down and get out. It was like the frosted mini wheat. The wheat side of me is trying to hurry up, and the frosting side is going slow down to configure. So, some of the things that I think are important to point out, especially a training, one of the training things that is for consideration. When we initially contacted ATC, we were talking to approach control. And there was no sense in us delaying and getting an extra conversation by telling him what our situation was. So the captain said, airport's in sight, while we were on the mask. He didn't say we got smoke on the flight deck or anything like that. Well, what's ATC say? Clear for the approach, right? So clear for 27 right. That was the ATIS advertised runway, and that was the runway we'd set up and brief for. And that's where I was pointed toward. And why I bring this up is ATC had to come back to us, because when the captain gave souls and fuel in pounds, well, you got to understand as pilots, fuel in hours, duration, which is important to ATC. But because he didn't give fuel in pounds, ATC had to come back to us while we're, it's like a long-tailed cat in a rocking chair tournament. We're so busy in there trying to fly, run the checklist, get down, and save ourselves. You like that, Steve?
That was good. Well done.
That's a Louisiana thing,
Nice.
by the way.
I'm a Chicago guy like this guy.
But it's important that, and you can do this in one breath, souls, fuel in hours duration, and pounds. And that way ATC has what they need to arm ARF, because ARF needs to know how much fuel are they going to have to push around with a bumper turret. How much are they going to be standing and walking in if one of these tanks break, okay? So as we join the extended final, and I can tell you, the smoke just kept building in volume to a point where it was getting very difficult for me to see. And as you can imagine, then the fight or flight thing was happening to me physiologically, psychologically. That was something I really hadn't prepared for. Half side of me was, I guess it was the wheat side, was trying to jump out of the airplane, and the frosting side is trying to stay in and fight and fly. And I kicked autopilot off because of the extra demands in the DC-8 of trying to manipulate the mode control panel, communicate to the captain. We don't have a toggle switch on the yoke to go to intercom. You got to come down here. So I've got to let go of the throttles, find which of these 8 switches to hit which way to talk to the crew, and it was a goat rope. So as we joined final, the smoke just kept getting thicker and thicker. And I didn't know it, but the next day in the hotel, the captain told me that in the first minute of our event, he lost both his primary flight displays. These DC-8s had to be re-engineered with 4 cathode ray tubes. Now you can imagine why that would happen. Smoke is going every which way, and it gets ingested into the avionics racks. So now think about a 777 or a new generation 737. That's a little comforting thought for you guys that are all glass cockpits, okay? So time is of the essence. I can't state that more importantly. Pilots do not appreciate the power of smoke. So as we were lining up on final, and I was having to lean over to close the distance between my screens that were still working, because out here I was really having difficulty seeing them. We've all been around the campfire, and you go, I can see my hand, but I can't see fingers. And as you get here, I can see fingers now. And as we touched down, it was like somebody had described earlier, the color and the mass and the heat of the smoke. It changed as soon as we touched down from a white kitchen match type smoke to a black tire fire. And it had heat mass to it, to the point where when, and we were like Fred Flintstone, feet were through the bottom of the airplane on the runway trying to stop and get out. And we didn't know how close the fire was to us during this event. That was the thing about it. And as we stopped the airplane, we totally lost visibility with each other. And we eventually went out the slide. I'll let you pick it up so I don't become a mic hog.
Oh, no. I'm listening along. It's excellent. Now, you're speaking of the slide that was perhaps going to be MEL'd. Is that correct?
It was close. It was spookily close.
Yeah.
And that rope was born in 1967. If you want to find out how strong you are, hang a rope from 1967 off your house and just see how long you can hang on to that, shimmying out a window. Motivation does amazing things to you. One of the things that we did improperly, because we had been training improperly, was very important that you guys catch this. So look up here if you're snoozing. If you train like you're going to fight, then you're going to fight like you train. If you're training improperly, you're probably going to react under stress, just like firefighters and police officers do. Under stress, you're going to react how you've been training. What we have been doing in a simulator in the DC-8, because under 121 training, we have 18 pounds to go in a 5-pound bag in a training event. And they go, we know the gouge is coming. Okay, you're going to do a cargo smoke at altitude. Come down, you do the approach. You do an NDB approach or whatever it was and landing. So what we've been doing, we put our goggles on and all this stuff. And we touched down in the simulator. We stopped the airplane. The first thing we do is what? Pull our mask off. It's a clear environment just like this. And we yell for emergency evacuation checklist. And we do it by memory, and we're doing all our drill. So that's what we did in an actual fire, because that's the way we've been training. Your fine motor skills are severely reduced under stress and get this tunnel vision thing. Another factor was we didn't know how close the fire was to us, so anything connecting me to that airplane was coming off, brother, I'm telling you. When we were shutting down the airplane by the emergency evacuation checklist, and most checklists now are, we have UPS, we have the QRH, and on the back side we have a clear sheet so you can read it, but you're not going to be able to read it in smoke. So what are you going to shut down? That's why it's important. The training we do with ARF is we teach them how to secure the airplane. They're not going to let anybody into the hot zone except for ARF guys. So we teach them how to secure the airplane in an improved method that what they've been doing is bottles, throttles, batteries, and we're teaching them, of course, that if you go for the T-handles first instead of the fuel levers, it could burn, the engine could run for another 30 to 40 seconds. And you don't want any delay while you're up there in the cockpit after you rescued crews. So that's one important little nuggets, we add for those guys. One of the things that I would like to point out, the rate and volume of smoke may certainly exceed the ability for your pack to drive smoke off the flight deck or reduce it. And I had this preconceived notion that smoke would be compartmentalized when we ran checklists and it wouldn't come forward, but man, it runs tip to tail down into avionics racks. We proved that in our event.
That's a heck of a story, and I'm sure once you got down that slide, obviously our vehicles were called out to respond, and I want to shift gears to Chief Sampey now. So as you approach this airplane that we've been speaking of that Jess had just landed, what are your first thoughts as you get on the scene if you have just minimal data such as type of aircraft and what have you? What do you do and advise your crews what to do?
I mean, with Jess and I, we've done training, actually, Jess, Marc, Steve, we're all first name basis because I consider us friends, because this is the first time we've all got together, although our friend from JFK is the first time I've met him, but other than that, I've trained with every one of them on here on this panel, and it's invaluable. Jess points out, gentleman earlier put it in this morning's forums, he says time is options and options are good. And I have to agree with that. And I'll go back to say when they're up in the air, fire is it's an adrenaline pump to begin with, as the psychologist put it. But when you're up 30,000 feet, 25,000 feet, 10,000 feet, any way you look at it, it's not good. So we're not going to bother them, but the more information, even little information, we can start entertaining our options. So it depends on what they've given us. If they've given us something that, and again, Jess, I'm not even sure if he called the alert until they're on the ground, but had they just anything in the air, we're going to be positioned. But now I pull up and I see somebody bailing out of an aircraft. I mean, we're going to communicate with them as soon as they get to the ground, and we're going to have air traffic control in with us on this. If I have questions, if I heard it, and I did a conference here last year with the cargo conference, and that was part of my presentation was and it's something that firemen are trained to pick up on the way the pilots talk. If you're excited, my ears perk. If I hear you sound like Darth Vader, my ears perk. You don't have to tell me at that point. We know you're busy, but on something like that, that's what we're listening for. If you're just as calm as a cucumber, the guy that hit the Hudson, he might have been a problem because he sounded as cool as a cucumber until he hit the water. God bless him, but I mean, that's something he declared as emergency, and that guy didn't, nothing. That's money, and that's, as far as aviation goes, that's a double bonus. But on something like in their case, I pull up, and people are bailing out of the aircraft, and that's happened. I've been doing this for 12 years at the airports, and we're at 31 flight operations on 8 active runways, and I've seen a lot of evacuations, some with warning and some without warning. And we're going to try to make that communication with the pilot, what have you done and what are your intentions? If he's going to tell us or tell air traffic control while they're in the air, when we get on that runway, we're bailing. That's important for him to know, that's important for us to know. So, but if they've already hit the ground and now something bad has happened, they're bailing out, as Just said, and he did a great class. So anybody that's never been in that class, at least airports across the country, phenomenal. I've had great training with FedEx. I've had great training with UPS, with the air traffic control, with ALPA. It's all good. It makes us, we all have a stake in this. So But when we see something like that, we need to secure the aircraft, and we need to get onto the aircraft. We're going to assist with getting off, and then we have to get on for those that can't get themselves off. And they brought it up again earlier this morning as far as flight crews. Flight crews are very limited. And if you don't mind, I'll kick into a quick story because I have a couple things on this lithium battery thing. As much as you think it was we beat this thing to death, there's just a couple options that it's hard to say just throw some water on it. It's hard to say halon's going to do it. It's when you're dealing with combustible metals. And it's the irony, because I always ask my parents, everybody here is old enough to be a parent, I'm sure. I don't need math. Why do I need math? I don't need accounting. I don't need chemistry. I don't need any of it. And I didn't want it either because I was going to be a fireman. What do I need to know? Then it's got hydraulics, and now I have a multi-million-dollar operating a year budget. So what I didn't care about is now coming back to bite me. But no more than chemistry is really what's now, that's our job. Our job is not water on fire, and it's chemistry. It's chemists outdoing Mother Nature is what it comes down to. So you're dealing with combustible metals. So it's not so easy when you have a lithium metal fire. It's not the same as a lithium ion or a lithium polymer. They're different. The ion is, I have 3 daughters and a wife, and they've broken every iPod, smartphone, MacBook that you can have. They broke them all. And none of them started on fire, and I mean, they live with a fireman. So, and by that I'm saying lithium ion, I think in itself is safe. Now the polymer is where it's different. They take it out of that metal case, a little bit more worry. But a metallic lithium, there's no, that's a combustible metal, folks. That's water. You don't put water on that. It's creating its own oxygen, like titanium, like magnesium. Putting water on it is going to make the fire worse. Unless in the fire service you have no other way to combat it, it's copious amounts, which means I really have to flood it, which makes good reason why them crash rigs are that big. But we have different ways to combat it. We have lithox, which is a dry powder, different than a dry chemical. I'm starting to sound like some chemist, and I'm not a chemist by any means, but it's our business. It's our business to know what works. Them little halon bottles, that stuff was outlawed in 1985. Help me? There's a reason. It's not good for the ozone, but is it good on fire? Absolutely good on fire. So they talk about 1211, they talk about 1301. In the fire service now, since the airlines bought up all the halon, we have to go to halon 1, which is, again, a clean agent, and it's very effective. But the halon you use in the aircraft, absolutely, I don't have a problem with it. If you look and see how small them little extinguishers are, you have water, and they tell you not to use the water, especially in a flight deck, and that's for obvious reasons with electrical. Halon is good for, it's a clean agent, and it's not conductive. So it can put the fire out, and actually you can actually breathe some of it, not a lot of it, which is why they're little bitty bottles. They're just enough to put that fire out. But it's a gas. So it's only going to work in a confined area. What's an airplane? It's a confined space by definition. Not just your cargo hold, your cabin is a confined space by definition. Your cockpit, it's an even smaller confined space. Your cargo holds, it's not an easy place to manipulate people. So what they do in the air, what he does with them in the air, what your training does, it helps us. If we have to come in and get you, we will. We had a situation, we had a flight take off from Chicago O'Hare. Somewhere in flight, they weren't 10, 20 minutes out. They had an in-flight emergency, had a fire in the cabin. And it's not uncommon. It's when you have that many, smoke in the cockpit or smoke in the cabin is an automatic elevation of alarm, at least for us, and I'm sure in other cities, they're going to call it for their mutual aid. So in other words, everybody on the airport is going to an area or the aircraft. But I hear, anybody hears smoke or fire, any fire service, they're asking for help before you get there, because usually they're coming from a bit of a distance. Chicago O'Hare is 2 miles from Chicago proper. So, but we have our Mavis group, mutual aid, box alarm, suburban folks on board with us, and the city folk. We start them in early. We bring them in now, because if something bad happens, nothing good happens with smoke. Sometimes it's little smoke, sometimes it's big smoke. We understand that. We respect that, and smoke and fire. So they had an aircraft that took off. It was an MD-80. I don't even think I need to mention the airlines. It's a major airline. And it reported smoke in the cabin. The flight attendant called the cockpit and says, we have smoke. We have pretty good smoke in the cabin. Never questioned it, declared an emergency, and started heading back towards O'Hare. So we were actually in position when they landed. And when they landed, he made it very clear he was stopping on the runway. We have heavy smoke in the cabin area. So we're prepared for that. We're going to follow the aircraft, which, again, it's usually at the request of the tower or the pilot, again, because we're staged down the runway. So we're getting to you in 10 to 20 seconds, no matter where you come on the runway. And as they landed, the pilot, he already told us he was declaring an emergency and he was going to evacuate. He changed his mind. And that's just great communication between a cabin crew and a flight crew, is all it turned out to be. But the point of my story is they had a fire. It was they got the primary and the secondary. The chargeables, the ones that are not rechargeable, them are your primary batteries. That's your metal lithium metals. The throwaways, so to speak, them are the most dangerous. So the rechargeable ones, what had happened is this was on in a briefcase. There was a rechargeable battery, an extra. It's supposed to be in a proper container. It was not. And what had happened, it was laying in the outside pouch of a briefcase, and it laid across a lanyard. Them little bead lanyards ran across and connected all three contacts, created a spark and a fire, and it started the briefcase on fire. And that was part of the PowerPoint, but we figured you had enough and it's the end of the day, so we weren't going to kill you with it. But you had an actual fire, flame visible in an overhead cargo compartment, baggage compartment inside an aircraft, fully loaded with fuel, fully loaded with people. That is a startle, surprise, whatever you call it over there. Somebody was, operational setback is what we call when we see guys his size. That's the OSH. So that's one of them operational setbacks, if you know what I mean.
What are you saying, Tim?
That's a pucker factor. There's no good that's coming out of that. But these flight attendants, they both went from different directions. They grabbed the halon extinguishers, and actually, I got to admit, to me, that's pretty gutsy. One opened it, and the other one hit it with the halon bottle and closed it. Waited about 10 seconds. The other one opened it up. The other one hit it with a halon bottle and closed it. And they thought, man, that's not a good place for that to be. But mind you, this is what's smoke in there. There's no mask, no protection. Somebody made the conscious decision to open the compartment, take it out, and put it in the ice bin. So when we landed, they told us it was aft, and they stopped on the runway. We came up to it. We dropped the rear stairs. We went up the firemen with gloves and masks on, grabbed the thing. We brought it onto the tarmac, and it's off the plane, and that guy didn't evacuate anyone. The smoke conditions cleared. Phenomenal job by the flight crew. Phenomenal job by the cabin crew. It was still smoldering. And something like that, that's a rechargeable. The halon was effective on it. If that was it was the lithium metal. By sticking it in the ice might have caused a reaction. So when I heard somebody say just dump water on it, understand something. There's nothing, and the guy made that very clear earlier. There's nothing that's for everything. If I have a lithium fire, I have a dry powder, not a dry chemical. It's different. It's called Lith-X, specifically made for lithiums. Your combustible metals have specific powders to put them out. There is not an ABC extinguisher. These are D. These are the bad stuff. So we have Metal X and we have Lith-X, and we have that stuff if we have to combat it. But again, at that point in time, to answer your question, after 20 minutes, I think you asked it ago, if we pull up and we see that you've already declared, we're not going to stop you. We hope that before you declare an evacuation, you ask us. We are your eyes and your ears outside of your aircraft. If the problem's inside your aircraft, we're not stopping you. If it's outside of your aircraft, it's making you think twice about Easy Victor or whatever your call sign is. That's the communication aspect of it. As soon as you get on the ground, what do you see? We don't see anything. We have a little fire in your engine. Did you use your onboards? We did. We're going to hit it with foam, just so you know. You know what? And that's at that point in time, if you ask us, do we need evacuation? If that's all it is, we put the fire out. We've had landing gear start up. It's meant to burn 5 minutes. That's where your magnesium and titanium is. It's meant to burn 5 minutes up the strut. We put it out. And again, and I've had it where the flight crew, and I respect that, they're doing their shutdown stuff, and we're kind of giving them the hand signals. And I know most people have forgotten them hand signals a long time ago. But we still have to communicate, because if you lose your electronics, folks, I've had it where you lose your electronics or you turn them off, I can't communicate with you. And more importantly, I can't open up maybe your cargo hold. Unless I take that ratchet 3,428 times, which if you don't know what I'm talking about is not good. We're going to penetrate it with our skin penetrating stuff before we have to do that ratchet stuff. So we'll ask you to shut things down, or we'll ask you not to shut things down in the best interest of your aircraft or of you. So your best thing you can do for the fire service, talk to them. Tell us what you have, what your conditions, have they gotten better, have they gotten worse? We're evacuating, we got it. We're going to take care of you once you're on the ground.
Great.
Sorry for the long answer.
No, great topics, great discussion. Jess, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, one of the surreal moments in our event was after we got to the hotel. We were treated at the hospital for smoke inhalations, and if you can imagine sitting in your birthday suit on the edge of the hotel bed because your uniform's too nasty to be wearing, and you didn't make it out with any bags, and get the TV on and CNN's on, and you're on CNN. So the first thing that's going through my mind is, what did I say is going to incriminate me, and what didn't we do right that the company's going to fry me over? And that's a
Like
normal,
the Cheeto?
that's a normal pilot reaction, you know. I mean, I hope I'm a normal pilot, but one of the things, and you kind of hit on that trigger there, Tim, as professionals, and we train, and depending on the experiences, whether military or civilian, you know, and I tell ARF this specifically, you cannot go by the tone of someone's voice to determine how bad the situation is. Case in point, and if you don't know about this cool website, it's liveatc.net. Nobody's writing it down. Liveatc.net. You can capture an MP3 format of actual ATC communications. You can go to the facility, the date, and it's in 30-minute blocks, and you can see how cool you sound on approach control when you're flying around with your DC-10 voice. But what I captured for training was what we actually said, what the captain actually said. I'm not throwing stones at him. He did a fantastic job. I didn't do everything perfect either, that's for sure. But here's what we did. We disarmed ARF and we disarmed ATC, because the first thing the captain said when he contacted Tower was, "Good day, Philly Tower." Now, we are on fire. Oxygen mask on, and forget that Army surplus mask. We weren't using that thing because we didn't have time for that whole goat rope. So, you know, here we are rolling in, and the captain says, "Good day, Philly Tower, UPS 1307, 27 right." Naturally, they say 27 right, Roger, wind 270 you cleared the land. And he says, "Hey, by the way," I'm going, what the? "By the way, have the equipment meet us. We had a smoke indicator come on." And now we have white smoke that's obscuring my visibility this time. And I'm going, what flight are you on, you know? But look, we didn't say smoke in the cockpit. We didn't say emergency. ATC declared it for us. We didn't say how much fuel we had on board. So then ATC comes back to us and he says, "Okay, now we need fuel in pounds. I know you're a little busy," the understatement of the year. So we can tell ARF how much fuel they got to push around. And then at the end of that, and I never heard him say this, but it's clearly on liveatc.net for history. He says, "Okay, you're clear to land 27 left." Now, we were headed to the right, briefed to right. That's what ATIS was advertising. That's what we're set up for. And the captain responded, it was, you know, you've been busy. We all been busy in the sim, and you know, it's unfair because instructors, he can see how busy you are, and he distracts you extra, and he says, gives you something, and you just tell him whatever to shut him up. So the captain just said, "Yeah, 27 left, you know, shut up." It's like, you know, he could have said purple grape ape, and he just said, "Purple grape ape, shut up," you know. So he said, "Yeah, clear to land 27 left." So now ATC thinks we're going to 27 left, which is the dedicated emergency runway in Philadelphia. There's nothing on our charts that indicates what is the dedicated emergency runway. I know there's some prerequisites, and it's a local agreement that's happened to be closest to ARF and UPS. But we had one shot at where we were going. Actually, that was a little bit longer runway, but we were going with the easiest target we had. And because that's the approach we were cleared for. And then Tower cleared us initially for 27 right, but then he changes to 27 left, and the captain acknowledged it. So now ARF, guess where they are? 27 left. They're doing their thing, their stage like they're supposed to be. And we're headed for 27 right, and I'm having to pull up my mask to yell for flaps and gear because I can't find which one of these toggle switches down there. I can't see it. Smoke's obscuring situation anyway. And then ATC goes, "Hey, you're lined up on the right." I'm going, "No kidding." and the captain says, "Oh, I thought we were clear for the right. Are we clear to land 27 right?" "Yeah, I'll just tell fire." So now ARF professionally had been woken up in the middle, this is midnight '03. They were woken up in the middle of the night, come out there, get on their apparatus, come out there, be where they're supposed to be within their FAA mandatory response times, and now they got to switch runways. So now the tower, the local controller, the frequency's clogged up when we could have said something to him with him moving all these ARF vehicles across the runway, taxiways. It was a goat rope extraordinaire. So we disarmed ARF because we did not communicate effectively, first of all. We disarmed ATC and then caused them to have to call us back again. And out of this accident came a safety recommendation by the NTSB that ATC, if they're switching runways on an aircraft that's during an emergency, that they should use the phraseology something like UPS 1307, now switching runways. So it's very clear. We've all been in parallel runways and they misspoke and said to land the other runway and we're lined up for the right and they said the left and we don't make a big deal of it. We just said, yeah, clear land 27 right, and kind of get it for the NTSB judge. So, that caused quite a boondoggle for us. But it was lessons learned and a safety recommendation came out of it.
And that's the movement after we get the incident. We get input from the pilots who were involved, and thank the Lord that you were there to give the illustration. And I mean, a great story along the way. I'm still trying to figure out how to spell goat rope, but I'll get that soon. But I get the severity of the situation. It's good stuff. As we talk about regulations that happen or occur or are a result of a certain incident, I'd like to bring in our FAA representative on the panel, Marc, who we can't get a word in edgewise with him talking so much today. So I wanted to give a chance to speak with you. He's a good friend. I'm giving him the business. I really am interested in a lot of the work that the FAA has been doing, and our previous FAA speakers that were on the stage talking about some of the testing going on at the tech center. What sort of regulations do you see coming out of airport safety and standards regarding firefighting that has shown promise, improvement, and some that are scheduled to be introduced here in the future?
Steve, thank you, and thank everybody else for allowing me the opportunity to come here and present a little bit of information to you from the FAA. Actually, out of the Philly incident and a couple others, there was several NTSB recommendations which brought about a lot of training requirements for Chief Sampey and his department with use with the high reach extendable turret. And we also changed the training where it used to say dealing with just aircraft in general within the FAA's training advisory circular. Now it specifies that that's both passenger and cargo aircraft. So the FAA is telling you that as a firefighter, we want you to be aware and knowledgeable on all aircraft landing, not just aircraft in general. So if you've got cargo aircraft, if you've got GA aircraft, if you've got large passenger aircraft landing at your airport, you need to know how to get into that aircraft. You need to know what types of propulsion systems they have, number of passengers, potentially amount of fuel that aircraft can hold to know what you're going to be dealing with. Several other things that the FAA has been working on, which Chief Sampey said, hey, we're just going to try and drown that battery and dump a bunch of water into it. Well, a couple of years ago, FedEx donated an aircraft to us, an A310, and we took it out to the desert out in California and did a lot of tests on it for about a year and a half. One of the tests that we did was weights and balance. We hooked up measuring tapes to the wings, to the nose, to the tail, and before every fire and after every fire, we would go and we would read the different measurements because, for instance, with Jess, they dumped a lot of water in there. Well, you've got a nozzle that's pumping water at least 250 gallons per minute times 8 pounds per gallon. That's a lot of weight going into an aircraft, and we were wondering how the weight of the water would affect the balance of the aircraft. Chief Stampy's got all his firefighters on the ground running around, and they're doing different things, or you might have other people, you have the passengers or whatever. Well, if they're dumping a lot of water into this aircraft, is that aircraft going to cause it to tilt and tip, or what can happen with it? So weights and balances was one of the things that we looked at. We have been for several years now, with the onset of the new large frame aircraft, been taking a look at different strategies on fighting fire with new larger aircraft. We also did full-scale ARF tests, again, on this cargo aircraft. It was an A310 converted into a cargo aircraft. And what we did was we went inside and lit a whole bunch of small fires and put them out different ways. We used the unit load device, and we would position the unit load device in different sections within the cargo hold of the aircraft, both the main deck and in the lower front cargo area. And then we would extinguish the aircraft using the high-reach extendable turret. And we also, in the front cargo hold, we used Halotron clean agent in there to see how that would work. Also, part of the testing was they looked at different types of nozzles. There's one type of nozzle that is on the high-reach extendable turret right now, which provides a large round spray, and they looked at different nozzles possibly for future use. And there was also some testing dealing with the liner of the aircraft. With the cargo aircraft, there's a liner on the inside, and they were wondering whether the fire would actually get caught in between the liner and the exterior of the fuselage. And if you were penetrating it, would the water get in there and not allow you to extinguish the fire? So this was some other tests that were being done that the FAA is working on. These are all online on the FAA's Technical Center website. You can reach it easily from the FAA's ARF website. Down at the, right underneath there, you'll see some names listed on the right-hand side. Down at the bottom, there's actually a link, and all these reports are currently available for you to read. One of the other things that the FAA is also doing, you heard about the lithium batteries in the cargo aircraft, I believe earlier today. The FAA is going through rulemaking right now. It's not from my line of business, but they are going through rulemaking, and they're trying to come more in line with some things that EASA has done. They're primarily dealing with the size limits on the compartments, and they're looking at a new class on the main deck, making it Class F. I don't know if that was covered this morning or not. And what it's going to do is it's going to require firefighting extinguishing systems within the compartment or within the containers, something so that the pilot doesn't have to get up and go back and fight the fire. So this is something that is on the horizon. Rulemaking is a very long process. Don't look for it tomorrow. If they hit all the wickets and it doesn't set on anybody's desks anywhere, maybe 2 years. So I'm not exactly sure where that's sitting right now, but it's a minimum of a 2-year process, but that's something that the FAA is working towards that's out there.
Great, and thanks to you and thanks to the FAA's Department of Airport Safety and Standards for taking the lead on this and working with the ARF working group, working with the stakeholders as well as all the firefighters around the nation and working with them and gathering their input. One question I have, I know you've done some work on the very large aircraft, like you said, the A380s, and I know you have a mock-up down at Int'l Air Base that you've done some test burns and things. And a question that just arose as you were speaking, have you had any experience working with the composite aircraft such as the 787 and also the A380s where it has a number of composites? What type of work have you been doing? And I'm not sure if the Tech Center covered some of that, but...
That's an excellent question. The Tech Center is doing work on composite aircraft. What they have done is they're using small pieces of composite material. Now, it's not the exact same material. The airlines are not necessarily releasing that to us, but they're using a composite material. They're using the glare, which is the glass laminate, and they're also using other composites, and they're using the aluminum, which is known, and they're penetrating them. They're setting them on fire with their equipment up there to see how it burns. They're checking to see whether the burn through is faster, whether it's slower, whether the fire stays within the carbon fibers or not. and they're actually getting ready to do some, they've done small-scale testing on small pieces, but they're getting ready to do some larger-scale testing on composite material now.
Great. And I have to ask this question. We have the A380 arriving at our airports now. I believe Chief Sampey sees them. I know Dave Siewert sees them there at JFK. Are there special considerations when approaching an aircraft with that many people, that much fuel, that size? Obviously, it's bigger, so we need more. But is there any extra considerations, such as being able to get your turret up that high to get in and penetrate? I mean, do you have different sized trucks, different vehicles that can access that type of airplane?
We do. We do. We acquired, and most of the, I won't say all of them, but most of the index, the aircraft or airports around the country have. And again, it's the help of the FAA. And I've seen 3 different FAA Tech Center, different guys from different parts of it. These guys do a great job, and we kind of held back a little bit on the new technology. We just received the latest technology, and it's a direct result from Marc and Keith Baggett. Will give him the shout out if I got that right. My kids see me later on. They did a great job. The drivers enhanced visual system. They again, it's the same as yours. Is the one you stick your face in, that thing that looks like an airbag. I mean, ours is basically zero visibility to get to it. So when we get to a plane that size, we waited until the technology was perfected, so to speak. Not new out, but waited till it made it through its humps. And we now have a 65-foot high-reach extendable turret with the capability of either putting water in it and or a clean agent in it as well. So the 65 boom is a extension from the 55 boom, which couldn't make the upper deck. So based on their research and their help, we now have, they're called 4500s based on the amount of water they carry, 630 gallons of AFFF foam concentrate, and a 65-foot penetrating nozzle that can make it into the upper deck of a large frame aircraft. So based on a lot of their research and a lot of cooperation amongst airports and the pilots and so forth, we now have something. And now you're starting to see these stair trucks that actually can make it up there. If you think about it, you can have up to 800 people on these aircraft. That's a city. That's a little town next to most major cities, all emptying out of an aircraft. And if you ever jumped out of the upper level of a 747-400, it's 36 feet. And the slides are not built for comfort, they're built for speed. So if you ever went and looked out that door, that's a hell of a, they don't want that. But and they have the same capability from the same distance. That's a lot of people coming from a long way. Their option would probably come down the stairs and maybe a little on the lower slides, so to speak. But that's a challenge. That's a challenge. But again, we just keep training on it. When that's our basically motto: New York, Chicago, LA. It doesn't make a difference. We all have we train for situations we pray never occur. But as the gentleman said it just before us, if it happens, we got one chance to get it right. So. That's why the training and the cooperation with guys like Jeff and the FAA Tech Center and the Air Traffic Control Tower, it has to be if we're going to get this right and save lives.
Dave, my question to you is there anything from an air traffic control standpoint, if you have, say, an A380 coming to land at 3-1 left at Kennedy and it decides to evacuate on the runway, obviously you've got a lot of maneuvering of traffic, and do you close the airport immediately? Do you close just that runway? What do you do? What are the downline calls that you make to make sure that it's, do you send airplanes elsewhere? What do you do with that?
Well, actually, if the emergency aircraft is the A380, that's not so much the issue. The issue is clearing the path for an emergency aircraft if we have 380s operating around the airport, because New York, and I'm sure Chicago, and I know for a fact Los Angeles, the airport wasn't ready for the Group 6 aircraft, particularly the 380s, and that we have limited routes we can taxi them around the airport. We have bridges over the expressways that have restrictions for the 380 due to wingtip clearance. So if the emergency aircraft is a 380, that doesn't really pose much of an issue for us, with the exception of it's going to be more on probably one of the 200-foot runways, 200-foot width runways, rather than the other ones. But the A380s that are on the surface taxiing around create a problem for us as far as how we can get them out of the way of the ARF folks.
I have a situation where if we have an aircraft that is on fire and Jess and I happen to be flying together, and I'm the first one down the slide, and Jess has been knocked unconscious from something, equipment in the cockpit, or smacked his head somewhere on the glare shield or what have you. He's a very large man, in case you haven't noticed that, and I wouldn't be able to get him out. As I slide down that slide and I meet up with Chief Sampey at the bottom of the stairs, is there a requirement or a requisite or an expectation that you will be able to go up there and get him out of that aircraft?
It's a unique environment, but it's not, someone his size we just can't leave behind. So we have to train. As much as it works against them, I guess, because it might take a couple of us to hump them out, but we train to go into the aircraft, and not everybody has that capability. I'm going to be quite frank. It's a manning scenario. Some crash rigs have one folk on it. We have our airport system has invested into the protection of the people that fly into the airports. So we have dedicated crews that go into. We have 2 dedicated crews that go into and for nothing other than to pull people out of an aircraft. We started, and I don't know how many have followed, we started a training that actually shows how to get people out of an aircraft. And we still teach that today. And basically, when I did this 5 years ago, when I first introduced this, I was the training coordinator for the airports at O'Hare. And I thought, man, it's easy for me to get out, but what about a big guy? It's a challenge. It's certain people love that challenge. So I grabbed a guy his size, and I figured out this is how we're going to get him out. And there's a way to get him out with minimal injuries, actually. And when I did this 5 years ago, to him, and I did that. I came up onto a presentation, and I had a guy his size over my back. And it's not about the size, folks. You're teaching people technique. Okay, technique is why someone my size can knock someone his size on his ass. It's just because if I hit him the right time at the right place, it can happen. It's not about, that's where physics comes in. I didn't pay attention to that until you get knocked out a couple times and you realize you don't fight them on their own plane. So, not so to speak. So I use his weight to our advantage, and somebody my size can get him out by myself, actually. And then there's a way to get them off the aircraft without sending them down head first, creating neck and back injury. So we actually have a way, I think you YouTube, but they filmed it down in Florida, but there's a way we pin a shoulder down and we literally throw the feet outside the aircraft and we go get the next one. And it's basically, there is an art to it, there is a technique to it, and we're going to get as many out as we can before we're out of breath, and then the next one comes in, and then the next one comes in, and we come from different angles. And yes, they do teach that. We do teach that. They do train on it. And no, he will not be left behind. He might be, that's a lot of meat. That's a lot of possum to be dragging out of that hole, as he would put it. And I'm not from Louisiana, but we'll get him out. One way or another, we'll get him out.
Marc, you had something to add?
I've seen Chief Stampy do this training.
It's not pretty.
Limited injury, that's just a statement, let me tell you. No, I've actually seen his training and how he does it, and he's got a unique way of getting you out, and it works.
He's from Chicago. I know he can throw some arms around and take some swings, that's for sure. Jess, I know you've been doing a lot of work with training. And working on just that scenario, how to get in and out of the cockpit, and working with our fighter friends on what to do when they approach the cockpit, or how do they extract a pilot out. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the NTSB recommendations specifically for ARF after the Philly fire, the DC-8, was to the Air Cargo Association to facilitate familiarization with cargo jets for the ARF crew members. Some airlines, prior to 9/11, and we found this, what we do, we've been training aircraft rescue firefighters at UPS and the IPA jointly since 1998. It really got put on steroids, so to speak, after Philly, because you don't know what you don't know, the rest of it. So we realized was there was a lack of familiarity with the cargo airplanes, and it wasn't ARF's fault. I mean, you take Philadelphia, it's one of the oldest departments in the nation. It's not their fault, but we weren't giving them the access that they needed. And what we do now, it's been described to me by ARF, and we came to Chicago last year with Chief Tim, and we try to fill that missing piece of the toolbox for the ARF crew member, and that is hands-on access. And I know the airlines they fear that if I let ARF come in there and really start getting familiar with opening doors and how to pin gear and where the battery locations, just how to disconnect the batteries. And we go to even the extent in our modules of strapping each crew member, ARF crew member, into the seats as a pilot, putting the seat erect just like you would land in a real landing scenario, put the armrest down, 5-point harness on, and move them up into flying position. And I teach them how to extract each other. The reason I did that was when we started doing this, I just said, "Oh, show me how you extract a crew member," when I first started doing this in 2008. And I witnessed these guys out in Oakland, great guys out there. They were trying to extract guys from a forward flying position. And it was because of a lack of familiarity, because nobody's giving them access to the airplanes to know how to move that seat. Half the type rating on MD-11 is how to move that dadgum seat. There's like 12 switches, Well, they're just getting the guy out best they can, and his feet getting hung up in rudder wells and all this kind of stuff. So we developed a technique there with ARF, and I would always extract another nugget or two from each one of these gigs, and we do one per quarter. We're booked out to 2019 at one per quarter, going and doing a very detailed, and it's called the UPS IPA ARF Cargo Jet Familiarization Course. It's at no cost to ARF, which it should be. But here's the thing I keep hearing over and over from all these ARF departments. We just got back from Calgary last month. We're going out to Denver in August, in Omaha, and it just goes on and on. We're booked out. But they're all saying the same thing. I go, "What kind of access you get in airplanes out here?" Well, after 9/11, nil to a little bit. And I understand the fear that the passenger airlines, the airplane's making revenue during the day. When it's sitting at night, there's nobody to babysit the airplane. But there has to be investment by the airlines, and UPS is able to do it. We're a little more fortunate because we got an airplane maybe sitting domestically during the day where we can utilize the airplane for hands-on, where it's more training friendly rather than the middle of the night. But I'll tell you, these firefighters appreciate any access that you give them. And just going around and saying, pointing there, like on Young Frankenstein, it's got to be hands-on access, just like for us for pilots. You can look at all the DVDs and all the posters, but if you leave the posters behind in the fire department when you go out on a run. And by the way, that's why the ARF database was developed. And if you're not familiar with that, the ARF Working Group is a nonprofit organization. I'll read it so I'll make sure to get it right. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting the science and improving the methods of aviation fire protection and prevention. And your airline can be a member just like UPS is and just like the Independent Pilot Association is. I mean, we need ARF to be armed to the teeth as best they can to save me. But I'm handicapping him by not giving him the access that he needs. So don't fear that the airplane may break a switch or something. What's a life worth? Think about your kid, your family, And, over and over we hear with cargo, well, we just can't justify the expenses here. We got 2 levels of safety on many things because you only got a couple of souls on there. So we're going educating these guys, giving them the access that they need, but you guys have to plug in as well. You can become an ARF crew member, an ARF working group member. And one of the things we did, we developed, the IPA and UPS developed jointly, it's called the Facilitator's Guide to Successful ARF Training. So you don't have to do the work, just go there, download the whole, all the PDFs, and everything's done for you. You just follow the script. All you got to do is provide the airplane and a few souls.
And that's some great advice, and we have a lot of management folks from the airlines here, and we appreciate them being here. Think about that at night, maybe perhaps allowing the ARF crews to get together and just come out and see your airplane. Like you said, just get a good look at it. I'm sure Chief Sampey can agree that getting there's different configurations. I mean, one 747 at one airline can be configured a different way with another airline. And when they approach on the scene, they have to assess when there's smoke and there's fire and there's stress. We're running out of time. As you can see, I work with all of these gentlemen, and they're the reason I volunteer my time, because there's the same passion that they have for fire safety. And I appreciate everyone's attendance here on the last panel of the day. Thanks for sticking around. And this time I'd like to open it up for any questions. If anyone has any, you can approach the microphones, or if you'd like, you could use the texting ability. Sir.
Yes, this Mike Moss here, safety volunteer in Chicago. Messages for Chief Sampey and possibly Dave as well. I've been on the receiving end of an emergency response in Chicago. You guys do a great job, Chief Sampey. But I believe clear and concise communication of critical info is really important, as I think most pilots here would agree. And you alluded to the direct communication between flight crews and the ARF commander or the ARF crew. In many cases, pilots or flight crews don't even know that exists. They think that it has to go through air traffic control. And it depends on the facility, of course. One airport might be different than another. But I'd be interested in your comments as far as what problems have you encountered between, in situations where you want to talk directly to the flight crew but have been hampered in doing so? And do you have any suggestions?
We actually had that problem. When I first started there, I started at all ranks, but when I took over as captain for training, we ran into that problem. How do I overcome that problem? I put them on my staff. It's just what they do in Chicago. Basically we incorporated the air traffic control, the training supervisor. He actually comes on and does the hands-on with us, communications class, so we're all on the same page. But the problem is it's going to be anybody's problem. Somebody else is speaking for you. So again, I'll go back to earlier in this whole forum. The communication, we don't want to talk to the pilots, or we will. If they want to talk to us, that's fine. They're going to talk to air traffic control, but what we've done to alleviate the problem that you're suggesting, because they were never turned over on our discrete emergency frequency. So what we had requested is, can you give them that discrete emergency frequency while in the air? So as soon as they're rolling out, they can switch over and say, here's what we got. So we're not bothering you, but you know what that is. Before you hit that ground, you're going to know what's frequency to talk where it's just you and I.
And would you say the ATC has been receptive to that?
They have been. Actually, again, you're always going to get that conflict. Nobody wants to give up their little piece of the pie. But in the last 5 years, we have made a complete turnaround and nothing but cooperation. And we have meetings often, and they have been excellent on the discrete frequency. They talk to us. They're very patient with us. And they give us the information. I haven't had a problem with them, and I think that comes from sitting down with folks and saying, here, this is what our problem. They don't know what our problems are. They're 364 feet up in the air. They have no idea that we're getting frustrated because we can't understand, or they're not switching them over. They let them know, and they switch them over right on rollout, switch over on 119 1/4 and talk to ARF or talk to rescue. They've been excellent for the last few years.
Thank you.
I apologize to the folks that have taken the microphone. We can't allow any more questions right now. We'll be here afterwards. You're more than welcome to approach us afterwards and ask any questions you have. Again, we appreciate your attendance, everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you very much to my panel for being here today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I definitely enjoy working with them on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.